Okay, folks, please take your seats so we can begin our next session. Kindly ask you to take your seats so we can begin our next session. Once again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session as we continue to explore this theme of this General Council. My name is Raíssa Brasil. I serve as the Vice President of the WCRC, representing Latin American region. And we're blessed to have an esteemed panel to guide us as we listen for how God is speaking to us throughout our time and our theme. And now with great thanks for your patience and perseverance this afternoon. Today, we are so blessed to welcome our panelists for the Team Input C as we listen and honor the vital youth voices as a gift of profound and depth and wisdom. Thank you so much for being here. Our first speaker today is Priyanka Sami. Priyanka is a Dalit feminist activist based in Bangalore, India, and a member of the Churches of South India. Priyanka is the convener of the National Federation of Dalit Women, a grassroots network of Dalit women-led community-based organizations. Priyanka is deeply involved in local, national, and global movements and networks advancing gender justice. Priyanka is currently a guest practitioner at the University of London, contributing to a course of human rights. Priyanka serves as a board member of the International Dalit Solidarity Network. She also sits on the board of Service Society, grassroots organization, working with the urban poor informal workers in Bangalore. She formerly served as one of the board of FRIDA, the Young Feminist Fund, and was part of UN Women's India's steering committee for Beijing Plus 30. She also served as National Gender Youth Advocate for the UN Women's Generation Equality Campaign. Priyanka's body of work focuses on unpacking and addressing intersectional issues, caste and gender-based violence, and strengthening feminist movements as the grassroots. Her areas of expertise include genders, intersectionality, and right-based advocacy across diverse international fora. Thank you, Priyanka, for sharing with us.
No, I'm good. Friends, comrades, siblings in faith, we meet at a time when the world is trembling under the weight of polycrisis, genocides unfolding in plain sight, a planet on fire, democracies in decay with macho-fascist regimes taking over, and human dignity under unprecedented threat. We inhabit a world on stolen land, stolen labor, and stolen lives. The empires of the past did not vanish, they merely evolved. From colonialism to capitalism, slavery took new shape through global supply chains, and genocides are now sanitized under the language of security operations. Every day, people across the world watch on their television screens and social media feeds the killing and starvation of thousands of children. Their suffering is broadcast in real time, yet met with silence, denial, and absolute apathy by the powers that be. We see this unfolding before our eyes in Gaza, from Afghanistan to Congo, Manipur to Myanmar, Kashmir to Haiti, Sudan to Yemen, and in countless other places where human lives are reduced to mere statistics and genocides itself become a site of profit. The question is then, my dear siblings, it's not whether we know of these realities. Of course we know of these realities. The question is, why do we remain complicit in the face of such moral catastrophe? If faith is to mean anything in the time of this deep moral crisis, this gathering must adopt expansive theology. It must call us as a people of conscience and our churches to reimagine its relevance in these times, to reclaim its prophetic role in public life, and to stand in unflinching solidarity with the oppressed people of the world. It must call us to rebuild collective consciousness and resilience. Let me remind us, my dear siblings, that we are not here to reform injustice. I say that again. We are not here to reform injustice. We are here to completely burn it down and dismantle it. I speak today as a Dalit activist from India, a voice from one of the world's most historically oppressed people. The caste system, which is more than 2,000 years old, is the longest surviving social hierarchy in the world, and yet it remains one of the world's best-kept secrets. Yes, the caste system continues to define who has dignity, who has privilege, and who is denied even basic human rights. Across South Asia and its diaspora, a lot of people think that the caste system is only an Indian problem. It's not. It's a South Asian problem. And in some time, I'll tell you why it's a global problem as well. So across South Asia and its diaspora, we are about 270 million people. Amongst us, Dalit women live at the intersections of the class, caste, gender hierarchies, and we are at the lowest rung of the social hierarchy. Therefore, we bear the heaviest burdens of violence, discrimination, and exclusion that is systemic and targeted towards us. Though India and Nepal's constitutions provide equality, caste shapes every aspect of life, every walk of life, where we live, what we eat, whom we marry, what jobs we do, and whose touch is pure and impure. So caste is not a social, cultural practice alone. It is a political economic system that dictates who controls land, who controls resources, who heads institutions, who remains invisible in decision-making tables. We live in times where struggles for social justice converge, revealing inherent similarities between issues. For instance, the Dalit and the Palestinian causes, though our realities may be distinct, there are deeply interconnected, intertwined within the same fabric of resistance, targeted violence, and intergenerational oppression. We as Dalits understand the urgency of dismantling structures that erase and dehumanize people. In doing so, we affirm our solidarity with the Palestinians' right to freedom and dignity. The caste system, as the world's most enduring social stratification model, casts a long shadow over other forms of oppression. From racism to settler colonialism, oppressors might indeed be drawing from the age-old playbook of the caste system. The caste system's blueprint of segregation and hierarchy have uncanny parallels in the mechanisms of oppression absorbed globally. Social and racial hierarchies devalue specific communities, justifying violence, discrimination, and exclusion as mechanisms for maintaining power structures. But caste does not end at national borders. Through migration, the South Asian diaspora has carried this social hierarchy of the caste system across the globe. It now exists in global cooperations at universities and even within our churches. Like racism, caste rests on the myth of purity and superiority. Both systems dehumanize, exclude, and sustain privilege. The Dalit movement has for long drawn parallels between casteism and racism, calling the decolonialization of our moral imagination. We Dalits have urged governments, international bodies, and churches to name caste-based discrimination along the lines of race, ethnicity, and gender in every official document. Because what is unnamed remains invisible. What is not counted remains unseen. And caste is unnamed, caste is not counted, and therefore it remains unseen. But perhaps the most painful truth we must confront today is that the church itself is not free from caste. Across South Asia, even among Christian communities, caste dictates social interactions, marriage, leadership, and access to power and resources. Dominant caste Christians often occupy leadership and influential roles within our churches. Dalit Christians, despite their faith and service, continue to be segregated, marginalized, and denied equal rights and dignity. Even conversion has not liberated us Dalits. Many Dalits embrace Christianity as an act of faith and resistance to escape the stigma of untouchability in the Hindu social order. Yet, our caste identity has followed us into our churches. It is appalling that even in 2025, almost 75 years after the abolition of untouchability in India, I am not just a Christian in our churches, I am a Dalit Christian, right? I'm not just a Christian. People ask, so what caste group do you belong to? And in a few seconds, they trace me back to me being a Dalit Christian. I urge the Christian community that a church that remains silent on caste cannot claim to stand for justice. A church that tolerates the caste hierarchy in its own house cannot heal a broken world. Now let me turn to the struggles of Dalit youth. Dalit young people are amongst the most vulnerable in our societies. For centuries, education has been denied to us by design. Today, despite affirmative action in countries like India and Nepal, systemic discrimination persists from casteist teachers and professors to exclusion in classrooms and universities. Dalit students often endure social isolation and administrative neglect. There's a rising trend of suicides among Dalit students in institutions of higher education in India. When they take their own lives, these are not isolated, but a part of a system that oppresses Dalits specifically and in a targeted manner, because it is a systemic discrimination that within campuses that kills them. Affirmative action in education and public employment has provoked resentment and severe backlash amongst dominant castes, creating an absolutely hostile environment for Dalit youth who dare to succeed. Lacking the social capital and networks that privilege confers, they enter the job market at a structural disadvantage. In workplaces, discrimination persists in hiring, in wages, in promotion, and workplace culture. Even when governments introduce progressive programs to promote Dalit entrepreneurship or skill training. These programs are chronically underfunded, poorly implemented, and stripped of intersectional understanding. Policies written without Dalit voices, policies written without the voices of historically oppressed people make markets and institutions blind to their realities. As a result, economic inequality deepens and young Dalits remain trapped between broken promises and systemic barriers. So, to transform this reality, affirmative action must move beyond tokenism. It must be redesigned to create real opportunity through investments. However, despite all these odds, Dalit youth continue to rise. They lead movements for justice. They create art that reclaims dignity and builds solidarities across movements. Our defiance is an act of faith, for Christ himself stood with the oppressed, not the powerful, breaking bread with those that are cast out, challenging the hierarchies of his time, and proclaiming that the meek shall inherit the earth. Our faith then is not passive belief, but radical resistance. It calls us to overturn the tables of power and to build a world where every life denied worth is restored to dignity. Our faith in Christ is insurrection against injustice. Our hope is revolutionary. Since this is a global congregation, it is important to note that caste travels with migration, like I mentioned earlier, embedding itself within South Asian communities abroad. The practice of caste-based exclusion continues unabated, even with faith communities. So, for this reason, Dalit activists and theologians have urged both regional and global churches to officially recognize caste as a global moral issue and to eradicate caste-based discrimination and include them in all foundational texts of documents the church owns. Only by naming it can we dismantle it. So, my dear siblings, in this time of unprecedented global inequality, polarization, war economies, ongoing genocide, the church holds a historic opportunity to move beyond symbolic empathy towards expansive theology and transformational solidarity. Just solidarity is not enough. I urge you to extend your transformational solidarities. Now, what does transformational solidarity mean? It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our churches. It demands accountability from us, not just in words, not just in texts, in documents, but in our daily actions, prophetic and political choices, where we decide how we move the money, whom we employ in our organizations, and whose voices we choose to amplify in all our initiatives. Recalibrating our theology and politics to embody transformational solidarity is not a one-time action, but a continuous process of learning, unlearning, strategizing, and re-strategizing. And as the oppressors invoke the same God to justify violence and domination, it is clear that the time for surface-level solidarities has long passed. What this moment demands is a faith that refuses complicity, a solidarity that is courageous and unfettered. A solidarity that recognizes and acts upon the unique struggles of historically excluded groups, indigenous peoples protecting their lands and culture, individuals resisting occupation and settler colonialism, those challenging the remnants of apartheid, and all oppressed communities striving for their rights and dignity. The oppressed people of the world need the church's courage, its willingness to dismantle systems that perpetuate inequality, including those within our walls. These are not times for quiet faith. These are times for radical courage. I will say that again. These are not times for quiet faith. These are times for radical courage. And I urge the churches to commit to transformational solidarities and radical courage. We absolutely need to foster interfaith and transnational solidarity movements. We cannot work in silos anymore. The church must see itself as a part of a broader moral ecosystem committed to peace, to pluralism, and the preservation of human rights and dignity. We need to annihilate caste-based discrimination and all hierarchies of exclusion within our churches. The church must actively engage in caste sensitization, truth-telling, and institutional audits to root out systemic discrimination at every level. We need to intentionally advance Dalit youth leadership and collective agency. We need to reimagine theological and faith-based education to include intersectional analysis, including caste, gender, race, disability, sexuality into theological curriculum. We need to ensure accountability and reparative action within our churches. I urge us to establish mechanisms for monitoring inclusion and justice committees, including independent reviews, data transparency, and reparative measures for communities historically marginalized within church structures. Accountability must be the measure of faith in action. To follow Christ is to stand with those crucified by the systems of today, and to act courageously and without compromise. May we and our churches rise in purpose and with conviction to build a world where no one is made to feel lesser in the eyes of God. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Thank you, Priyanka, for your very wise and challenging input. Now I would like to call our next panelist, Reverend Adon Naaman. He is the pastor of the Evangelical Presbyterian Church in Homs City in Kaloum area in Syria. He holds a bachelor's degree in computer engineering and master's degree in theology. Currently, he is a doctor ministry candidate at Fuller Theological Seminary, where his research focuses on reconciliation and leadership in post-conflict societies. Drawing on both pastoral experience and academic study, his work explores how faith communities can foster healing, justice, and peace after war, with particular attention to the Syrian context. He is married and the father of a young daughter. Please put your hands together to welcome Reverend Adon.
Good evening. I will start with a very short personal story. Every time I travel, whether it's a short trip inside Syria or a flight abroad, something very predictable happens. I always choose the biggest suitcase I can find. My wife always laughs and asks, "Why do you need all of this? Are you going to the desert?" It's become almost a family joke. But deep inside, I know why. Because for many Syrians, travel is never just travel. It carries a hidden question. What if I never come back because of any political reason? At airports, I always notice this small pattern. Most travelers from other countries walk with light luggage. But when I see someone struggling with 2 large suitcases, I smile quietly to myself and say, that one is probably Syrian. It's not because we love hoarding tendency. It's because we have learned to live with uncertainty, to always be prepared for the unexpected, to pack not only what we need, but also what we might need, just in case life changes again. And so, the heavy suitcase became, for me, a symbol of how we live in Syria, and maybe how we live as human beings in a world where certainty has disappeared. We live in a time when tomorrow feels breakable. We plan, but we don't always know if our plans will survive the night. And that is where my story begins, in a space between hope and uncertainty. For many years, Syria has lived in what I can only describe as a permanent maybe. Maybe there will be peace. Maybe there will be electricity tomorrow. Maybe our children will have a future here, or maybe somewhere else. We learn to live one day at a time, to hold our dreams carefully like glass. In the beginning, we used to say, one day this will end. But after years of war and displacement, people stopped counting days. We learned a new way of living, one where the horizon disappears, and you keep walking anyway. But is this experience only a Syrian one? Is that shared by many? I believe it is shared by many in our world, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Lebanon, in Ukraine, in every place where people woke up not knowing what tomorrow will bring. From this soil of uncertainty, something began to grow inside me, slowly, quietly. A new way of understanding faith and hope. A theology born not from books or conferences, but from the daily act of surviving with dignity. I call it horizonless hope. What does this mean? Horizonless hope is a hope practiced when the future is hidden. It is the faith to keep walking when the road fades into fog. It is not about seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. It's about becoming the light inside the tunnel. It is about becoming the light inside the tunnel. There is a quote by a Syrian playwright, Sa'dallah Wannous. It says, "We are condemned to hope." I think he meant that hope is not optional for us. It's not a mood. It's a survival skill. It is the one thing that keeps us human when everything else collapses. In Syria, I discovered that we are condemned not only to hope, but also to context. We don't get to choose peaceful times for our faith. We live our theology inside the storm, not beyond it. And that's why I believe horizonless hope, it's not a luxury for a good days. It is the spiritual oxygen for bad ones. It's what keeps people carrying, serving, and believing even when nothing makes sense. It's not optimism. Optimism expects things to get better. Hope in our experience is something else. Hope is the decision to remain faithful even if things don't get better. Sometimes life looks like exactly this picture. A road fading into fog. You don't know where it leads. You only know that you must keep walking. That is horizonless hope. There is one passage in the Bible that always speaks to me deeply in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3. But this I can to mind, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. These words were written after Jerusalem had been destroyed, the city in ruins, the people exiled, the temple gone. No horizon, no plan, no future. And yet, this voice dares to say, I have hope. This is the heart of horizonless hope. It's not hope that denies pain. It speaks through pain. It doesn't wait for the situation to improve. It creates meaning within the ruins. Another story that always inspires me is Abraham. The book of Hebrews says he went out not knowing where he was going. Abraham's journey began without a map. Faith was not a GPS system. It was a relationship. He trusted the one who called him, not clarity of the destination. And that is same pattern we see again and again in Scripture. God meets people not at the end of the road, but within the fog. Moses in the wilderness, Elijah in cave, the disciples in the storm. In every case, hope is not the removal of uncertainty. It's the transformation of it. It's as if God is whispering, you don't need to see the horizon. You only need to trust that I walk beside you. This brings me to why I am here. Because the theme of this council is persevere in your witness, and I want to tell you, horizonless hope is perseverance. It is faith that refused to give up its testimony. In Syria, perseverance looked like very simple. It looked like a pastor keeping the church open even when the congregation was shrinking to 3 people. It looked like Sunday school servants who continued to teach children in the basements during bombing. It looked like elders who kept distribute aid to everyone in the city, even they don't trust their neighbors. It looked like parents who drew a smile on the face to their newborn baby, even they cannot guarantee its future. None of them know if their work would change anything. They simply believed that love was still worth practicing. That is witness. That is perseverance. For me, to persevere in witness means to hold the light, not until the dawn appears, but as the light itself when the horizon is gone. And maybe That is what the world needs from the church today. Not louder doctrines, not bigger structures, but communities that dare to hope without guarantees. Churches that remain human, compassionate, and faithful even where results are invisible. Theology, then, is not about predicting the future. It is about care for faith that can survive when the future disappears. Let me return to the story I began with. The heavy suitcase. Maybe I still pack too much because somewhere inside I know that life is unpredictable. Maybe I have accepted that I cannot control the horizon, but I have also learned something deeper, that even when we cannot see the destination, we can still walk together. Hope without horizon teaches us community, because in the fog, no one walks alone. And maybe this is what God is teaching the global church in our time, to stop depending on certainty and start depending on one another. I will repeat it. To stop depending on certainty and start depending on one another and on grace. So my prayer for us as we gather here is that we may learn this theology of horizonless hope, to persevere not because we see the end, but because we trust the one who walks beside us. Because maybe, just maybe, hope without horizon is not the end of faith. It is its purest form. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reverend Nadon, for sharing with us in a very deep, deep, deep move. Thank you. Our last panelist is Dr. Vittoria Turner. She is the Director of Studies, Academic Dean at the Scottish Episcopal Institute in Edinburgh. Her PhD was awarded in 2023 from the University of Edinburgh and is under contract to be published by Brill next year in the Theology and Mission in the World Christianity series. Victoria is a member of the United Reformed Church in the Iona community and a trustee of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, a nonviolent peacemaking charity. She edited and published collections that share the ecclesiology and theology of young people, a couple of whom are here at this General Council. With SCM Press in 2021 and 2023, respectively. Thank you, Victoria, for sharing with us. Please join your hands. Put your hands together for Victoria. Thank you.
Prynhawn da pawb. It's a joy to be here. I was thinking, actually, it's about 10 years since I started my journey in these global ecumenical spaces as a steward, and to be here addressing you is quite amazing. I feel really grateful. So Edinburgh, the city where I live in Scotland, hosted the Spanish Film Festival. I went to see a film called Pheasant Island. You can go to the next slide. Pheasant Island is a little piece of land in the middle of the river Bidassoa. Could you pop the next slide on, please? Perfect. So one side of this river, or the opposite of the land, is Spain, and the other side is France. The island in the middle swaps between being either under French or under Spanish jurisdiction every 6 months. It's crazy. As a local. This area of the world is called the Basque Country, which straddles the north-central Spain and southwestern France, and is one of, what linguists think, is one of the oldest languages in Europe. Many Basque residents want self-rule and independence from both Spain and from France. For residents in this area, movement between the Basque areas of Spain and France is pretty easy because of the European Union that my country, stupidly, has left. The film that I watched, however, focused on people who are traveling to France to seek asylum. So when they arrive in Irún, on the Spanish side, they find that the border is closed off. There are controls for pedestrians, train passengers, and even for those in small boats. But of course, the guards only ask for the documentation of those who look Arab or sub-Saharan African. If their document's not in order, they're sent back to Spain. So some people decide to try and swim the river, resulting in some people dying on this crossing. The film follows a couple who are Spanish citizens living on the French side. They spot two migrants trying to cross the river and that they're in trouble. Whilst they were able to save one, the other one sadly drowned. The film sees the couple learn more about the lives of asylum seekers in their town and eventually becoming advocates. The film ends with the burial of the Sardine Carnival, Enterro de la Sardina, celebrated on Ash Wednesday. In my context, we have Pancake Day, Shrove Tuesday, and we make pancakes. And I know in Trinidad and Tobago, they also have a cool carnival, so my culture sucks. But this Enterro de la Sardina is a symbolic burial of the past to allow society to be reborn, transformed, and with new vigor. The sardine is a symbol representing the excesses of the festival season being burnt, representing regeneration and liberation, the passage of the symbol through the fire representing a purging of vices, and a restoration of the order temporarily subverted during the festival. In ceremonies of symbolic burial, the theme is one of reflection. So the couple in this film's job is to create these larger-than-life-size puppets. Could you pop on the next slide again, please? Including the sardine for the festival. The final scene of the film follows the woman being stopped at the border into France for a second time. She was caught the first time trying to take the boy who she saved from drowning into France. The second time, her car was followed by this carnival procession. With so much going on around the border, the guards got distracted. The puppets, which each weigh about 50 kilograms, but apparently are balanced in a way that it's not too painful, they were being controlled and warned by migrants in this film. As they reached the crossing, the migrants removed themselves from these suits and they ran across the border into France. The film closed with the burning of the sardine. So I was really inspired by this story, and I wanted to use it to help structure my talk, the first part of which is going to be witnessing. I was inspired by the couple's engagement with the community that they previously ignored. Their eyes were opened. And secondly, tradition and purging, where here tradition is actually used to subvert injustice. So witnessing, I want to start by quoting a little from the Belhar Confession, that the church must therefore stand by people in any form of suffering and need. The church must witness against and strive against any form of injustice, so that justice may roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. That the church, as the possession of God, must stand where the Lord stands, namely against injustice and with the wronged. That in following Christ, the church must witness against all the powerful and privileged who selflessly seek their own interests and thus control and harm others. I think our conception of what it means to witness has shifted because the stories in my context that we tell about ourselves have changed. Paul Virilio was a late French Catholic philosopher phenomenologist, and he talked about how our overly technologized world is multiplying the bodily grievances and epistemological inconveniences that distract us from God. He spoke of our computers, we might want to change this today to smartphones, as vision machines. These devices become not just tools where we can consult information, but they produce a synthetic time that comes with our will to universalize illumination. Where with our phones, we think we can do and see everything, almost like we ourselves are becoming God. And it has a reversing effect where we also are being wished to be gazed upon, as if we're being adorned. So we are watching and being watched. We've watched the genocide occur in Gaza. That's different to witnessing. Michael Morelli, who is a Canadian theologian, also talks about a rush of power that comes when we watch through these vision machines, almost an intoxication and an idea of control that comes with being in charge of this fleeting moment. I don't know whether anyone else has felt like they're existing in a different mental or maybe even physical space when you're absorbed in technology. When 10 minutes or 30 minutes passes, and if someone asks you what you've been doing, you couldn't actually answer them. Gen Z calls this brain rot, but I think maybe a better term might be brain abuse. Bong Chung-hal, a Korean philosopher living in Germany, talks about how we're enslaving ourselves to these machines, altering our hobbies, interests, opinions, identities, and time for attention or approval. The stories that we tell about ourselves have changed. Support systems are seen as weakness, and success only quantified economically. It is becoming rarer in the UK to define yourself as part of a community. A member church, a workers' union, even a trade, maybe not a women's group, or even a geographical area like a village or a town. I recently visited a photographic exhibition called Resistance, which showed women's working-class eco and anti-nuclear protests. One image caught me where you could see the smiles on the faces of women providing meals for the whole community that was striking during the 1926 general strike. Last year, in the UK, 14 million people faced going hungry because of not enough money. 90% of young people were worried about earning enough money to support themselves in the future. This is scandalous in such a rich country. The communal identity of being proud to be working class has dissipated, and people feel like they're on their own. In 2023, 1 in 5 children and young people aged 8 to 25 had a probable mental health condition. My country is sick. Suicide was the leading cause of death for people aged 5 to 35 in the UK. Schools in the UK are cutting subjects, art, music, drama, and focusing on subjects that lead to success, economics, maths, business studies. We're teaching our children that there's only one way of surviving, and that way is the capitalistic system. That's only upheld by exploitation. Our children are afraid of the future. A poem by R.S. Thomas, a Welsh priest poet, captures some of this. Can you go on to the next slide? It's called The Word. Oh, sorry, the next one again. A pen appeared, and the God said, "Write what it is to be a person." And my hand hovered long over the bare page. Until there, like footprints of the lost traveler, letters took shape on the page's blankness, and I spelled out the word lonely. And my hand moved to erase it, but the voices of all those waiting at life's window cried out loud, "It is true." I think this is not only altering how we think of ourselves and how we act as individuals, but also changing how we are as churches. In the UK, our churches are faced with decline. Less people are attending, being baptized, and committing to mainline churches. In consequence, our churches are becoming a lot more careful, a lot more self-absorbed as we navigate this perceived crisis. We're being more careful in both our witness and our economic footprint. We're stifling often the prophetic. Regarding the genocide in Palestine, the churches in the UK tread carefully. They took a long time to come to a common mind. And they often are choosing to speak in some kind of collective rather than on their own. I'm recognizing too that the churches were not just speaking as churches discerning God in our situation, but we're using charities, especially Christian Aid, to speak through. Now, I have no problems with Christian Aid, nor with doing things together, but I found in ecumenical circles, especially in England, that these discussions over tense points of departure, whether it be to support Palestine, affirming diverse sexualities, speaking honestly about money, are avoided. And a tame middle way is debated among only church hierarchy. A watered-down ecumenical statement that's come from 6 church leaders, to me, has a lot less weight than a church statement, or even better, call to action, that originated from local grassroots discussion, and even one of the smallest denominations. So if we can put this back into our theoretical framework that I've presented about how we see ourselves and act in our technological age, this action of tepid unity is seeking a populist gaze of affirmation. It's not seeking a prophetic movement that comes from discussion, dialogue, and discernment. With the situation demanding the urgency of Gaza and Palestine, how dare we, as churches with so much privilege, especially in my context, also with historic connections, or maybe we'll use the word collusions, tread carefully to protect ourselves, hide behind charities and NGOs, and not stand up and proclaim this injustice in the name of the gospel. We're also being much more careful with our physical assets. We're safeguarding for the future and becoming more efficient. A lot more secular and managerial language is entering our churches, even into the sense of people going for ministry. They're using cost-based analysis to talk about the vocation of ministry. We're masking secular managerial language with theology. Maybe you've heard new roots or fresh shoots to talk about prioritizing where money is spent. Some churches are being cast as a burden. But I don't recall Jesus ever telling anyone they weren't young enough or dynamic enough to follow him. I recall Jesus telling us to liquidate our assets and trust in him. Our language about the future of the church, in my context, is focusing on reducing and protecting, over-explaining and looking over our shoulders. I'm not sure that culling the weakest to make the strongest is really a biblical mandate. We've recently in Scotland lost Cathy Galloway, who was a Church of Scotland minister and the first woman leader of the Iona community. She played with the story recorded in Mark 10, 17 to 31, where Jesus tells a rich man to sell all he has and to follow him. Playing the voice of the disciples, Cathy Galloway imagined them thinking, the money got in this man's way. Whether it was the money or the status or power, I don't know. But obviously you can't follow Jesus Christ and be your own boss. It's quite clear that we're following him. We're the learners. We're certainly getting used to not being the most popular folk around. I can see us heading for disaster, but the 100 times as much is not clear. We're poorer than when we started. We never know whether there's going to be a bed for us, and most of us have left our families behind. Funny, I never thought of money as being something that could get in your way, more as something that could let you get your way. As churches in the UK, we're wanting to cling on to our privilege, being so fearful of losing it. We want to speak and be listened to, but not to speak prophetically. Our churches too are leaning into a vulnerability persona. Are we really too weak or fragile to stand where God stands? Do we not exactly want to give up our privilege to stand with the weak and destitute and work with them to reclaim their power? We desire privilege, we want success and the ability to do things that others can't do, to be separated out and to be called unique, special, or impressive. Why do we think there's such an obsession with studying political theologians, maybe like Bonhoeffer? Can you do the next slide, please? Whether taken as an American-style freedom fighter, this is the film showing Bonhoeffer, it was an American film, and he's got a gun in his hand if you look carefully, or being able to use him to speak into any situation that forwards a liberal theological position today. There's just been published a review by an excellent New Zealander scholar, Andrew Clark Howard, on the book The White Bonhoeffer, A Post-Colonial Pilgrimage. Andrew reveals how the author, who premised this book on themselves feeling akin to Bonhoeffer as a middle to upper class, relatively smart white man, centers whiteness as the conduit for knowing, without any real confrontation with the violence of coloniality or empire. Quoting here from Andrew's review, he says, "This is white Christian innocence in the Bonhoeffer industrial complex. Bonhoeffer is a figure who looms large in the white Christian imagination through a range of radical, liberal, and conservative approaches. Yet in all such camps, a similar hermeneutic is adopted, whereby Bonhoeffer himself, not merely his written work, but his personality itself, stands as the most authentic representation of one's position. The author of this book, in the first chapter, begins where Bonhoeffer would want us to start. Regarding discipleship, the author seeks to fill out some of the incompleteness within this well-known classic that Bonhoeffer himself sensed that would need to be done. This personality hermeneutic, rife across liberal Bonhoeffer scholarship, feeds into the wider problem of privileging white subjectivity in the undertaking of a decolonial theology today. Rather than understanding Bonhoeffer and his own whiteness as part of the problem, Bonhoeffer himself is allowed to, this is quoting Andrew again, I love it, it's amazing. Bonhoeffer himself is allowed to speak from beyond the grave to excuse his own sins. The author of this book, when deciding to write a book on a post-colonial privilege to decenter their whiteness, chose a theologian that reminded him of himself, rather than explore who actually inspired Bonhoeffer and his witness, the black Christians in the USA, the women who supported and I'm sure challenged him. The persona of Bonhoeffer keeps that central stage. Our stories don't relay our connectedness, but they center on our own knowing. Michael Jagasar has summed up this tendency well as ongoing colonial habits. These inherited deposits continue to hold many in the Reformed family in multiple forms of theological and ecclesial captivity, especially noticeably in the Reformed habit to defer to its theological ancestors to ensure what it means to be properly Reformed. These Reformed ancestors, Michael continues, offers theological or moral authorization for conquest and Euro-Western expansion. They were fed by the idea of the Theatrum Mundi unbelievers' supposed role in enacting God's salvific drama for unenlightened savages. Reformed history and the development of its core theological doctrines did not escape coloniality and its insidious reach, and Jannike's presentation demonstrated this brilliantly. So, I'll start to wrap up now, sorry. To map back to the scene from the film, we still have not burnt the sardine. We've not purged ourselves in Europe or in the UK from our entanglements with colonialism. We keep defaulting to problematic ideas of tradition or doctrine that moves us back into spaces of privilege, and we spend time excusing those people for their blindness towards their privilege, rather than seeing how acknowledging these past mistakes can enable us to let go of grasping that identity towards renewing our church and world through collective action and power. David Thompson is one of our prevalent historians in the URC, and he wrote how Reformed is not an off-the-peg suit of clothes that one can buy and put on, without having to do the hard theological work involved in interpreting what the gospel of God's grace declared in the person and work of the Lord Jesus Christ means. You can go to the last slide. Living up to being a Reformed church is actually a much more risky enterprise than we sometimes suppose. Our tradition is in collective discernment. It is in jumping towards the risk into these tricky conversations, into detangling our violent past and being honest about how confessions have failed to hear the Spirit's groans and see Christ in the eyes of the dispossessed. Just as the carnival puppets enabled liberation in the film scene, our tradition is disruptive to the order of the day. It is in this leap towards rawness and the unknown that is so alien and so necessary to counter what our society teaches. God's promise of abundance and this mission for a life flourishing for all disorientates the rhetoric that those with privilege deserve all they have, and those who do not are a necessary evil. Being Reformed is not to be in the business of congratulating ourselves. We need to purge ourselves from our self-obsessed society, peel ourselves away from our vision machines, promote releasing ourselves from our privilege, and participate in grassroots movements that build up collective power. Privilege buries the prophet under the rubble. I wonder what God's church would look like if it actually prioritized solidarity over prosperity. I really hope I'll see it someday. Thank you.
I would like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for sharing, for challenging us, for moving us towards a communion that not only can relate to the issues of this world, but who feels moved to do something about it. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, once again, please don't be angry at me. Unfortunately, as we persevere, we don't have time for questions of clarification right now. We will discuss this, though, in our groups of discernment. But I would like to share with you just one point. Once, Reverend Michael Blair told me something that I carry with me until this day. He told me that if you want to give voice to the voiceless or to a specific group of people, just pass the microphone. So I would like to invite you to do so, because today this is what we did. Even though we are not able to share our part from the contribution, we were able to pass the microphone to the young voices. So continue doing this back in your home churches. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing. Please continue this discussion within your groups. And now I invite our General Interim Secretary, Setri Niomi, to give some announcements.
Thank you all very much. Yes, thank you. Thank you. We thank our young people. It always is a pain when we are not able to engage in such inspiring conversation from the floor. But I hope it is inspiring us to also include it in conversations we have in various places in the space of the General Council. So we're at a point where we go to the discernment groups and work on the inputs from today's listening groups. The theme input itself, all 4 of them, we've had 3 so far, inspire us to be part of our conversations. They are not part of the discernments. Some people have asked me during the break around the mission, the proposals from the mission. The 3 that were presented here by Professor Alan Bosak are all in the proposals that are in the workbook. So let's ensure that we are looking at them, and I just point out that the first one is actually the very last one, the strategies, point D. The second one is in the conceptual goals, and then the third one is strategies, point C, so that none of us is confused about these. They are all in there. I pray that we have a good discussion in the discernment. I don't want to take any more time in this time. We'll meet after the discernments. Thank you very much. I hope that we have good discussions. Thank you.